mother love in infancy and childhood is as important for mental health as are vitamins and proteins for physical health. That's Bowlby, the primary name we associate with attachment, a name you should know if you're going into psychology. And you can see the year 1951, which is why he calls it mother love instead of parent love. Okay? So now we would no longer do that because the roles have shifted a bit. And failure to thrive is in fact a condition that results in an absence of touch and love, and it means that a child literally doesn't grow physically. So it's true on a couple levels. And this is the story that I often tell and ask to predict, and this is a true story. It happened when my own first child was born around that time. So I had my first child about this little girl's age, and so it really touched me at that time. And this was baby Jessica. I'll tell you a little bit about the story. She was born to a too young mother, teenage mother, and the mother decided to not tell her boyfriend at the time, the father of the child, that she was pregnant, and she gave the baby up for adoption. And she was no longer seeing that young man that she had become pregnant with. And so the adoptive family hadn't been able to have a child. They were so eager to have a child. They waited many years. They had a very nice home and they loved her dearly. And when she was about 18 months old, the young woman who had given birth to her got in touch. They got somehow or other, she connected again with that boyfriend with whom she, paired with the father of the child, of Jessica, and they got back together and got into a relationship, a serious relationship, like let's get married kind of relationship. And she told him that she had had a baby. And when he learned that he had a child, he wanted to make his paternal claim. He hadn't given up custody, but she had. And so they filed a lawsuit to get the baby back. And it was very, very dramatic case because now this child had been with these parents for more than 18 months, right from birth. And now they're going to take this child away from the only parents she's ever known. And here's the picture when baby Jessica was finally taken away and given back to her birth parents and taken away permanently from the only parents she'd ever known. And the question I ask you when we think about attachment is, this would be a great group discussion, is what do you think was the outcome for baby Jessica? Like, did she suffer a lifelong problem with relationships, or what do you think might have happened? And I'd like everyone to just jot down their own thinking on this. And then I'll just call it someone. And I'm going to ask someone what they think and why, and then ask others how much you agree with what is said. And so let me ask Carolyn if you wouldn't mind sharing what your thoughts on this were. Carolyn, are you able to get your mic on? April, what are your thoughts on this?
I'm still thinking about it.
So you didn't write anything down?
Not yet. I'm still thinking.
Did you write something down, Kelly? Who wrote something down just now?
Would it be like the trust versus mistrust?
It's a good point. We're gonna come back to it. Hope, what did you write down?
I think the outcome is that she might not know it like later down in life, but she will always have that feeling of an unstable home environment, or even like anxiety might develop.
Okay,
Anxiety, depression, or even attachment issues on either side. Too much attachment or not enough attachment.
okay. So she may develop lifelong attachment styles. How many think that she might develop a lifelong, sort of an anxious attachment pattern? A lot of you nodding yes. A lot of you- Okay, now I want to go back to a couple slides here. Something that Richard just said to this stage. Birth to 18 months. Trust versus mistrust. Do you think she had a successful resolution to this crisis with her adoptive parents that she lived with for the first?
I would think so because she trusted that family from the day she was given to that family. And then to just be given back to her actual parents
Yeah,
kind of misguided her.
yeah. I mean, so this crisis was solved. She had trust. Her emotional pathways with respect to trust for other people were established. Thank you, adoptive parents, because that probably isn't a crisis she's going to have. And if you go home and you look up baby Jessica and, do maybe a little more searching for this, you'll see that she's fine. She's just fine. Why? Because she had a firm foundation in trust. It's hard to disrupt it once it's rebuilt successfully. Okay, that's kind of what attachment is about. Like, if someone successfully resolves this crisis, they learn throughout their lives they can depend on people around them. That doesn't go away. Like, bad things might happen. They get in a bad relationship and they find they can't trust everyone, right? But they still have a foundational place of trust for others. And so baby Jessica is okay, and you can look her up when you get home. She's, of course, well, my daughter's 38 now, so I suppose she's around that age. Okay, and I think we'll just talk briefly. We're going to move forward now through a bunch of little content here. So developing attachment is a reciprocal process. It's that motherese. It's like the baby goes, and the mother's like, oh, yes, like that, right? Skin contact, really important. Eye contact, really important. And this reciprocal smiling behavior. Baby smiles, mom, they mirror each other, right? They have synchronous routines like that. This first point here where it says skin contact after birth, and I wrote yes and no. Well, if a woman gives birth in a typical way, a vaginal delivery, very often they put that baby right in her arms immediately, like maybe even before the cord is cut, because it's believed to be so important that skin contact is needed right after birth. But sometimes a mom has to deliver with a cesarean section, or she's had a lot of difficulty and she can't have the baby. Maybe they even had to put her out and she's not conscious and she can't hold the baby right after birth. Does that mean that forever and ever that relationship is compromised? No. It's good to have skin contact after birth, but it's not essential to developing a strong attachment. And that's why I wrote yes or no there. Yes and no. Okay, one of our first models for attachment relates to Lorenzinus ducks, 1937. And maybe you know that ducks and some other fowl, they do something called imprinting, which means whatever the first moving object they see after hatching, they think that's mom. And they follow it everywhere. And so Lorenz became the first moving object that his ducks saw. And you can see they followed him around as if he was mom, just like the babies do. And that's you can't change it. Like, they don't accept an adoptive parent at that point. And of course, it has survival value in general. And we can In fact, they even use this to help move, I want to say trumpeter swans back into an area that they needed to migrate to, but they were coming extinct, and they caused those swans to imprint on this little flying machine. And then that flying machine became the bird to teach them how to migrate. It's a pretty strong phenomenon. Is that similar to humans? Do infants imprint on the first person they see and that's it? They can never change? No, right? But we do have a similarity in attachment, because usually it's to often, at least in the culture that's the root of these studies, the attachment is primarily to one person, even preferring one parent to the other, right? So it's not the same as imprinting. Then the second one who started this study is Harlow, and he identified something called contact comfort. And there's a video that you can watch that, honestly, I can't even watch it because I found it so kind of like horrifying. But he took newborn primates away from their mothers and then tried to see, well, how did they do? And for example, he took one group and gave them a wire mother that had food, or a mother that was a little bit softer with cloth with no food. So the infants had to choose, do I want food or do I want the comfort of that soft cloth? And then, of course, the reverse condition. And he found that under all circumstances, the infants would go quick into the wire mother, get their food, and then run back into that quote unquote fake mother who had no food, to the softness so they could cuddle. And he used it to say that that was like, that was the emotion of love. Actually, he kind of skirted the question a little bit, but that's how it was interpreted. And so the outcomes were the cloth mother was sought, regardless of whether she had food. The love, the contact was more important than the food. The cloth mother was always gone to when they were fearful. Like if they put them in a new place, they would be afraid. They would run to that cloth mother. The cloth mother, if they put the primate in an unfamiliar situation with the wire mother, the infant would not explore. Well, the choice, the infant would look at it. But if you put it with the cloth mother that it had seen as this attachment figure, the infant would explore the area. If they separated the infant from its cloth mother, in general, it would stop exploring space. And there was more stomach or digestive issues if they just had the wire mother with food. Without the contact, they could not process their food properly. They couldn't properly metabolize. And so he concluded that contact comfort was essential to health. And if you're interested, you can look up some of Harlow's studies. Another name that you should know, and I only have his name written small here, but Harlow is that researcher. So then along comes Bowlby. And Bowlby had like a childhood that was based on the guidelines for upper class parents at the time, which, remember them? Don't hug your child, don't touch your child too much. Don't, give them a pat on the head if they do. Well, remember those guidelines? And that's how he was raised. And his father died. His mother, he would just see her for tea. He might have had in and out nannies who didn't, so it was hard. And then he was sent off to boarding school at the age of 7, where he lived. You guys have had an experience like that. Boarding school. I can't imagine how that was if any of you had it, but to me, it seems really hard at that young age. And so he never had a sense of attachment, it sounds like. And so then when he became an adult, got his education, he worked at this school for quote unquote, at that time called maladjusted children, children who weren't fitting into their worlds. And there were 2 kids in particular that were foundational to his later theories. One was this teenager who was just isolated, kind of closed off. He'd never had a stable mother figure. He had been put into that place for stealing things, but he was just closed off. Like he couldn't engage with anybody. And the other was an anxious boy, 7 or 8, and he just wouldn't let Bowlby out of his sight, trailed him around everywhere. And so he took those as 2 extremes of attachment. He did a lot of work with this. He worked with what were called juvenile delinquents at the time. And he also worked with kids who were hospitalized sometimes for a long time with contagious illnesses. And so he studied kids who were taken away from their parents and got some really good data on it, right? And he identified that to be attached, there are 4 things that have to be there. And as I talk about these, just in case you're getting bored thinking about kids, I want you to think about your life right now, because the same guidelines apply to adults. And hopefully each of you has someone to whom you're attached. And that might be, you know, it might be a romantic partner, but it doesn't have to be. It could be a sibling or a friend or a parent. So think of the person that you're most attached to. And now let's think about these 4 components. The first is safe haven. And safe haven just means when the child is distressed, they can go to that person. Right? The child has just fallen down. What are they going to do? Run to mama. If they're attached to mama, if they trust mama, right? What do? If you have a little fender bender going home today, it's a little stressful. You know, the police are gonna come, get your accident report. Are you gonna call anybody? Who is that person? When you talk to that person, are you gonna feel that? And if so, then that person is a safe haven to you. If you talk to them and they're like, what are you doing? You're not careful. Well, that's not a safe haven, right? Safe haven, first component of attachment. Another component of attachment is separation distress. And you read already that around the age of, certainly about 18 months, even as young as 9 months, say, infants start to experience separation anxiety, right? Separation distress. They don't want to be apart from mom. They start to cry when they're dropped off at daycare. And so you can think for yourself, take that loved one, the one you called when you have the accident. Now imagine that they've just told you that they have accepted a job in the Peace Corps and they're going to a very remote area where there's no internet and no phone, but don't worry, they'll be back once a year. How are you feeling? Do you feel a little distressed? If so, that's a sign of healthy attachment, according to Bowlby. Next, we have proximity maintenance. That means you can picture the little child. When they go into an unfamiliar setting, they try to stay near their attachment figure, near mom, near dad, whoever the attachment figure is. That's what proximity is. Mom or dad goes to another room, they might go to that room too. And for us, in adult lives, well, you try and be near the one you love, right? Try and be around them when you can. Same thing. And then finally, secure base. This is a really nice one. It means that for the child, maybe take that inhibited child who's a little shy to go play in the sandbox, and now take mom sitting there on the bench. And maybe the child's sitting at her foot at first, right? And then eventually gets further and further and finally starts playing with the toys. Why? Because he knows mom is there. He knows that if he needs mom, she's there. Secure base. Secure base. And maybe in our adult lives, we can think of it as, you know, you have to make a speech, something scary. You're nervous about it. Do you feel better when your attachment figure is there? Do you want your attachment figure in the room? And that would be secure base in adulthood. So these 4 components you should know for sure. And then I have these examples that we don't have time for. So let's just go to this internal working model and talk about strange situation and we'll be done. So Bowlby says that we all develop an internal working model of attachment, and it's based on these series of questions. First, just as we're going through our lives, picture the infant in this case. The infant is always asking our cousin, is my caregiver nearby? I need my caregiver. I can't walk. I can't eat. I need my caregiver. Is that person nearby? And if the answer is yes, and the answer is yes again and again and again and again, and every time something happens, is there someone nearby who's responsive and attentive to me? And if the answer is mostly yes, then that child develops a secure attachment. It means they feel that they have love, they feel confident doing what they want to do, and that's when you see secure base. Like this child can relax, this child can play, this child can try new things, this child can explore because they have this secure base going on. But now let's imagine that the answer is no. Is the caregiver near, attentive, responsive? And the answer is no. Maybe the caregiver is preoccupied, working in their computer. Maybe the caregiver is away. Maybe there's, a mood thing going on or an addiction thing going on. But for whatever reason, the answer is no. Well, that for a child who is reliant on the care of the mother is going to bring about separation anxiety, a sense of anxiety. I need to know that this person's here, and they're not, right? And so then what happens? Then the child asks, well, could I get near that person? Can I get near mom? Is she just in the other room? Right? Is proximity seeking a viable option? And if the answer is yes, and if this is a continual pattern, right? If every time the infant wants to know if the caregiver is near, and the answer is no, 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 if it's a continual pattern, and the infant is always having to go find mom because she's never there, then we end up having an anxious attachment style that can last through life. It morphs into what we eventually in adulthood call a preoccupied style. It means that this child is going to be anxious anytime their loved one is out of sight. In an adult relationship, it might play out like, a boyfriend-girlfriend kind of thing, and every time the other person is like late for dinner, or late for a meeting they were supposed to have, the one who has that preoccupied style is starting to get really anxious and think for sure that person has left her. Like there's an anxiety then in all the relationships. And so now let's go back and let's say this child is asked, is the caregiver near, attentive, and responsive? The answer is no. And there's a repeated pattern of no, 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 no. And the child asks the next question, can I get near the caregiver? Can I get close to them? And the answer is still no. This is sort of a hopeless situation. And the infant eventually starts to avoid, to forget that they ever wanted that caregiver. Amnesia, kind of detachment, a kind of indifference. And that plays out in other relationships. And so we end up with sort of an avoidant pattern that happens both in the infant, that we'll look at in a moment in this strange situation, and then also in the adult. The person is like, I don't need a relationship. I'm independent. Maybe even I'm too good for all that. A dismissive adult attachment style. And let me just ask you before I do our last thing for today, which is the strange situation task. Let me just ask you if you have any questions about this internal working model.